It's the 1600s, and Europe's elite are at a fancy banquet, passing around plates of ground-up mummies. Yeah, you heard that right. Actual ancient Egyptian corpses, turned into medicine, baked into bread, and served as a delicacy. For centuries, Europeans were obsessed with eating mummies, thinking they'd cure everything from headaches to the plague. Why? It's a wild tale of alchemy, greed, and some seriously twisted beliefs. From global grave robbing to fake mummies made from criminals, from art painted with human remains to cursed legends born from guilt, this story will blow your mind. Stick around as we unpack 15 shocking reasons behind history's weirdest health craze. Hit that subscribe button and let's dig into the creepy truth you don't learn in history class. 1. Global mummy trade. A worldwide grave-robbing spree, the European craze for mummy medicine turned sacred burial sites across the globe into plunder zones, far beyond Egypt's borders. While Egyptian mummies were the gold standard, their scarcity by the 16th century drove looters to other cultures with mummification traditions. In the Canary Islands, the indigenous Guanche people preserved their dead in volcanic caves, using herbs and resins to create remarkably intact mummies. Spanish conquistadors, aware of Europe's obsession, began looting these sites in the 1500s, shipping Guanche mummies to markets in Seville and Lisbon. Merchants hyped them as fresher than Egyptian mummies, claiming their cave-dried preservation made them more potent for medicinal use. A 1586 Spanish chronicle describes a single ship carrying 40 Guanche bodies to Europe, sold at a premium to apothecaries. In South America, the Inca and Chinchorro cultures mummified their elites, often in seated positions with offerings like gold and textiles. By the 17th century, European explorers in Peru and Chile were raiding these tombs. With one 1632 report detailing a Lima merchant grinding up hundreds of Andean mummies for export as mummia americana. These mummies, some dating back to 5000 BCE, were prized for their freeze-dried preservation, which Europeans believed enhanced their healing essence. Even Asian burial sites weren't spared. Reports from the 1600s mention Tibetan mummies, preserved with salts, being smuggled to Europe via Silk Road traders. This global looting spree obliterated cultural heritage, with sacred remains reduced to commodities. The scale was staggering. A 1650 Dutch trade log estimates that thousands of foreign corpses entered Europe annually, often mislabeled as Egyptian to fetch higher prices. The trade's brutality was matched by its deception. Buyers rarely knew the true origins of their medicine, consuming a grim mix of global dead with blind faith in its exotic allure. 2. Counterfeit mummies. A gruesome con game as Egyptian mummies grew scarce. A dark cottage industry emerged. Counterfeit mummies made from fresh corpses. By the late 16th century, demand outstripped supply, and unscrupulous suppliers turned to European morgues, execution grounds, and even battlefields for bodies. These were treated with bitumen, spices, and crude wrappings to mimic ancient mummies. A 1618 account from Venice describes a merchant arrested for dressing up hanged criminals as Egyptian mummies, soaking them in pitch, and wrapping them in linen stolen from local weavers. In North Africa, some reports suggest enslaved people or prisoners were killed specifically to create fresh mummies. A practice so horrific it was rarely documented explicitly, but hinted at in 17th century Ottoman records. European apothecaries, aware of the fraud, often turned a blind eye. Profit was king. A 1657 text by English apothecary John French warned that 3/4 of mummy sold is false, citing cases where animal remains or even charred wood were mixed into powders. Yet the market thrived on ignorance and hype. Buyers, from nobles to merchants, were so enamored with the idea of ancient Egyptian cures that they ignored the stench of fraud. In 1675, a London pharmacist admitted to selling mummy made from a local beggar's corpse, claiming no one can tell the difference. The scam wasn't just about money, it fueled a cycle of desecration, as fresh graves were robbed to keep up with demand. This counterfeit trade eroded trust in mummy medicine by the 1700s, with critics like physician Thomas Brown mocking it as a trade in dead men's flesh. The grim irony. Many Europeans consumed their own countrymen, believing they were tasting pharaohs, in a macabre con that lasted centuries. 3 alchemical beliefs. Mummies as the elixir of life. Renaissance alchemists saw mummies as more than medicine. They were a gateway to immortality. Rooted in the belief in the quinta essentia, 5th essence, a mystical life force, mummies were thought to hold the secret to eternal preservation. Alchemists like Paracelsus argued that their defiance of decay proved they contained a divine essence transferable to the living. A 1603 recipe by Johann Hartmann described a spirit of mummy, made by distilling mummy powder with rosewater, mercury, and myrrh, claiming it could renew the body's vigor. Some went further, suggesting mummy consumption could impart ancient wisdom. A 1621 alchemical text by Oswald Kroll recounts a noble who ate mummy powder and claimed to see visions of Egyptian priests. These ideas weren't fringe. Alchemists were the rock stars of Renaissance science, blending mysticism with early chemistry. Their recipes were wild. One 1598 formula mixed mummy with unicorn horn, likely narwhal tusk, and gold leaf to create a universal panacea for everything from plague to melancholy. At elite gatherings, these concoctions were served as status symbols, with hosts boasting of their alchemical prowess. The obsession wasn't just medical, it was spiritual, with mummies seen as a bridge to the divine. This mystical allure drove demand, as nobles and scholars alike chased the promise of eternal life through a spoonful of corpse dust. Even Shakespeare nodded to this in Othello, calling mummy a drug with magical properties. The alchemical craze faded by the 1700s, but not before mummies became the ultimate symbol of Renaissance ambition. 4. Mummy brown pigment. Art with a dark secret. The paint, mummy brown, was a gruesome staple in European art, made by grinding mummies into a rich, reddish-brown pigment. Prized for its translucent warmth, it was used by masters like Eugene Delacroix and J.M.W. Turner, whose dramatic landscapes may owe their glow to human remains. Paint makers like Winsor and Newton sourced mummies directly from Egypt, with a 19th-century supplier boasting of processing 1 mummy per batch for consistency. The pigment's origins were an open secret. Artists often knew but didn't care, valuing its unique hue. A 1849 art manual described mummy brown as indispensable for portraiture, giving skin tones an eerie depth. By the 19th century, the Preraphaelite Brotherhood embraced it, with Dante Gabriel Rossetti reportedly using it until he learned its source and buried his tube in horror. The trade was grimly efficient. Mummies were ground in bulk, with leftover bones discarded or sold as fertilizer. Production continued into the 20th century, only stopping in the 1960s when supplies dwindled. Today, conservators face ethical dilemmas. Many masterpieces contain mummy brown, raising questions about displaying art made from human remains. A 2018 study of a Turner painting confirmed mummy brown via chemical analysis, sparking debate about whether to disclose its origins to museum visitors. The pigment's legacy is a haunting reminder of how the mummy trade infiltrated even the highest echelons of culture, turning sacred remains into brushstrokes. 5. Religious loophole. Cannibalism with a holy excuse. Europe's Christian majority justified eating mummies by deeming them pagan relics, exempt from the sanctity of Christian burials. This loophole, rooted in medieval theology, saw Egyptian mummies as soulless artifacts, fair game for consumption. The relic trade, where saints' bones were venerated, set a precedent. Human remains could be powerful objects. A 1560 theological tract argued that heathen dead lacked the divine protection of Christian corpses, greenlighting their use. Yet dissent existed. Pope Sixtus V in 1589 reportedly called mummy eating a sin against nature, though his words had little impact. The practice thrived, with monasteries even stocking mummy powder for medicinal use. A 1623 record from a Paris abbey lists mummia, alongside herbs, used to treat monks' ailments. The hypocrisy was stark. Christians revered their own dead but saw no issue devouring those of another culture. This mindset fueled the trade, with mummies treated as commodities rather than people. By the 1700s, Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire mocked the practice as barbaric, but it persisted in religious circles longer than expected, with some rural priests prescribing mummy well into the 18th century. The loophole reveals a chilling double standard, where faith justified cultural desecration. 6. Economic boom. Mummies as big business. The mummy trade was a blockbuster industry, rivaling silk and spices in profitability. By the 1600s, Egyptian ports like Alexandria and Damietta were hubs for mummy processing, with workers sorting and packing bodies for export. In Europe, ports like Venice and Hamburg hosted mummy markets, where auctions drew apothecaries and collectors. A 1640 Venetian trade log lists 200 mummies sold in a single month, fetching prices equivalent to $500,000 today. Grinding stations in cities like London churned out powder on site, with one 1678 account describing a shop where mummies are ground fresh daily. The trade employed thousands, from Egyptian looters to European merchants, creating a grim supply chain. Entire towns in Egypt thrived on the industry, with families specializing in tomb raiding. The economic ripple effect was massive. Shipbuilders, spice traders, and even linen weavers profited from the mummy boom. Prices varied wildly. An intact royal mummy could cost 50 gold coins, about $10,000 today, while a vial of powder was a penny, making it accessible to the masses. The trade scale was so vast that it reshaped local economies, but it came at a cost. Egypt's cultural heritage was stripped bare to fuel Europe's wallets. 7. Pricing and scams. A market rife with fraud. The mummy market was a scammer's dream, with prices reflecting a hierarchy of quality. So-called royal mummies, allegedly from pharaonic tombs, sold for exorbitant sums, up to 100 gold coins in 1650s London, roughly $20,000 today. Mid-tier priest mummies were cheaper, while common mummy powder, often mixed with dirt or animal remains, cost pennies. A 1672 apothecary's ledger from Paris lists mummia regia at 10 times the price of mummia vulgaris, though chemical tests later showed no difference. Fraud was rampant. Merchants passed off local corpses or even charcoal as mummy, banking on buyers' ignorance. A 1665 Amsterdam report describes a merchant caught selling mummy made from cow bones, yet customers kept buying, seduced by the Egyptian mystique. Some apothecaries offered mummy subscriptions, delivering weekly powder to loyal clients, often diluted with sawdust. The lack of regulation meant scams flourished, with one 1690s English critic lamenting that half the mummy in England is but dust and deceit. The market's reliance on hype over substance foreshadowed modern consumer scams, where branding trumps reality. 8. Archaeological loss. A civilization ground to dust. The mummy trade obliterated Egypt's archaeological record, erasing entire chapters of history. Tombs in Saqqara, Thebes, and the Valley of the Kings were ransacked, with looters smashing sarcophagi and discarding papyri, amulets, and jewelry as worthless. A 19th century estimate suggests 500 mummies were exported between 1500 and 1800, many from royal caches. When archaeologist Auguste Mariette excavated Deir el-Bahri in the 1850s, he found a royal mummy cache half-looted, with broken coffins and scattered bones. Artifacts that could have revealed details about ancient Egyptian life, diets, diseases, beliefs, were burned or sold as trinkets. A 1702 French merchant's log describes discarding useless tomb goods to fit more mummies on a ship. The loss was catastrophic. Entire dynasties' stories were ground into powder. Modern Egyptologists like Zahi Hawass estimate that 70% of known tombs were damaged by the trade. The destruction wasn't just physical, it erased cultural knowledge, leaving gaps in our understanding of one of history's greatest civilizations. 9. Cultural shift. From dinner plate to museum case, the decline of mummy eating came slowly, driven by science and shifting values. In the 1780s, chemist Anton Lavoisier tested mummy powder and found no medicinal value, calling it mere dust. The 1822 decipherment of the Rosetta Stone by Jean-François Champollion revealed mummies' cultural significance, turning them from curiosities to historical treasures. By the 1830s, mummy banquets were mocked as barbaric, replaced by scholarly lectures at institutions like the Royal Society. Museums began preserving mummies, with the British Museum acquiring dozens by 1850. Yet the practice lingered. Merck's 1908 catalog still listed mummia as a curiosity, and rural apothecaries sold it into the early 20th century. The shift reflected a broader Enlightenment trend. Reason over superstition. But the damage was done, countless mummies had been consumed, and Europe's newfound respect came too late to save them. 10. Modern parallels. Wellness fads with a mummy vibe. The mummy craze mirrors today's wellness industry, where unproven remedies thrive on hype. In 2024, ex-posts hyped adaptogenic mushrooms as cure-alls, echoing mummy powder's promises. Like 17th century nobles, modern consumers chase exotic fixes. Think $200 detox kits or collagen powders with dubious benefits. The mummy trade's reliance on branding, e.g., royal mummies, parallels influencer-driven marketing, where charisma trumps evidence. A 2023 X thread with 10,000 likes claimed a Himalayan salt cleanse cured arthritis, reminiscent of mummy wine's hype. The lesson: we're not as far from our mummy-eating ancestors as we think, still chasing miracles with blind faith. 11. Ethical debates. Mummies in museums today. The mummy trade's legacy haunts modern museums. In 2021, Oxford's Pitt Rivers Museum removed mummies from display, citing respect for human remains. Egypt's 2024 repatriation campaign demands the return of mummies from the British Museum and Louvre, arguing they were looted. Yet, some curators defend displays as educational, noting that mummies offer insights into ancient health and culture. A 2019 study of a Louvre mummy revealed details about ancient dentistry, supporting this view. The debate echoes the mummy-eating era when human remains were commodified without consent. Today's question: how do we balance knowledge with respect for the dead? 12. Bizarre practices. Mummies as party drugs. Mummy powder wasn't just medicine, it was a Renaissance party drug. A 1623 Venetian text describes nobles snorting mummy mixed with opium, claiming it induced visions of the Nile. Others used it in love potions, believing it could stir the passions. A 1660 London diary recounts a banquet where guests drank mummy-infused wine for euphoria. No evidence suggests it worked, but the taboo thrill kept it popular. Some alchemists even claimed mummy could summon spirits, with one 1610 recipe promising communion with ancient souls. These practices made mummy a staple at elite gatherings, blending medicine with mysticism. 13. Cultural desecration. Erasing Egyptian souls. Ancient Egyptians mummified bodies to preserve the soul's afterlife journey, using rituals like the opening of the mouth to ensure eternal life. European consumption was a direct violation, scattering sacred remains. A 12th century Arabic traveler, Ibn Jumay, called it a crime against humanity, noting that mummies were torn from their gods. The trade ignored Egyptian beliefs, treating mummies as objects. A 1690s French merchant boasted of emptying a tomb in a day, discarding sacred amulets. This desecration erased personal stories, names, prayers, lives, reducing them to powder for profit. 14. Smuggling networks. A criminal underworld. The mummy trade fueled a criminal underworld, with smugglers evading Ottoman bans. In 1634, a French merchant was caught hiding 20 mummies in wine barrels, claiming they were tar. Others disguised mummies as living passengers, draping them in cloaks. A 1650 Ottoman report describes a smuggling ring bribing officials to export hundreds of bodies annually. The trade secrecy bred violence. Looters clashed with tomb guards, and rival merchants sabotaged each other's shipments. This underworld thrived on Europe's obsession, turning sacred remains into black market gold. 15. Mummy curse myth. Guilt turned to legend. The mummy's curse myth, popularized after Tutankhamun's 1922 discovery, may stem from the mummy-eating era. Consumers reported misfortunes, like a 1682 French noble who died after a mummy banquet, blaming a pharaoh's curse. These tales, likely fueled by guilt, grew into Gothic horror stories. An 1827 novel, The Mummy, depicted a vengeful mummy, cementing the trope. The myth reflects Europe's unease with its own desecration, turning cultural shame into supernatural legend that still haunts pop culture. Well, folks, that's the wild, creepy tale of how Europeans ate mummies for centuries, turning ancient Egyptian remains into medicine, paint, and even party snacks. From looting global tombs to snorting mummy powder at banquets, this bizarre history shows just how far people will go for a miracle cure. Which of these 15 shocking facts blew your mind the most? The counterfeit corpses. The cursed legends. Drop a comment below and let us know. If you loved this dive into history's weirdest health craze, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell for more strange stories you won't find in textbooks. Want us to uncover another historical oddity? Tell us what's next. Until then, stay curious and maybe check your dinner ingredients.